what's going on, Los Angeles Bruin Nation, LAFB fam, your dynamic duo, the Thriller and Madman, back together again to talk all things UCLA football. We have a really exciting episode today. Will and I are going to start with some stories from yesterday's open scrimmage, but then get into sort of the main event of content, which is all about 2025 depth chart and who we are going to see on the field, kicking off with Utah just next week. My goodness, we are inside 7 days of the kickoff of the 2025 season, and we've got it all covered for you right here on the one and only UCLA LAFB channel. But before we dive in, Thriller, my brother from another mother, how we doing? We had so much fun yesterday hanging out, open scrimmage, went for lunch in Brentwood. What a great day to catch up with my brother. How we doing, Thriller? How's the weekend going? How's life?
Everything's great, man. Mentally, I'm still stuck in traffic where we were at yesterday, but it was a phenomenal day at the Rose Bowl. Was able to kind of, rub shoulders with the team, the coaching staff. We got to kind of watch, the preferred starters and what we think the starting lineup is going to be. But before we get into that, guys, please smash that subscribe button. This is a big year for UCLA LAFB. We got to have more subscribers, guys. Please let us know what we can do to help that out. But we got a lot to recap on yesterday. And bro, it's always the best just getting to hang with the Madman. There's nothing like it.
Always the best to hang with you, Thriller. We had a really good time at the open scrimmage. I think DeShaun kept it a little bit closer to the vest than I think we were anticipating a bit. There was no 11-on-11. There was no 7-on-7. He didn't really show too much. We were sort of joking. It wasn't quite what we were necessarily expecting. Yeah. It was a very kind of serious atmosphere. No food, no music. It wasn't one of these sort of spring showcase type of events. It was very much all business. And, I think it was more about the team having an opportunity to just sort of get comfortable with the Rose Bowl. Like, how does the field feel like? What is it like to sort of catch some passes with that backdrop and whatnot? So it was a much tighter sort of environment than I think you and I were sort of expecting and projecting moving forward. But nonetheless, I think we got some tidbits going into our projections with the starting depth chart. Your thoughts just yesterday, Will, before we get into the content?
Yeah, I think it was that the concept of the idea was cool. Like, to bring the community together before the season to kind of have one last hurrah to watch the team get prepared for the season. But like you said, man, I think the first event traditionally and all events and things like that, it can be the worst when it goes, if you're looking at how it can be, improved upon, how you can add different elements. No food, no water. That one really hurt. And then no music out there. It felt a little dead. I was next to the reporter's side and one of them were joking like I could take a nap right now. But,
right.
It's awesome that we're having these types of events, but I just think a lot more thought needs to go into that, especially if we're making the trek from the West Side to the Rose Bowl. Well, you know what I mean? So, but it was great to see, everything out there, man, all the stars and people aligned. I mean, I got to meet QB1 yesterday. I thought that was pretty awesome. Got to
little
talk
selfie time.
Yeah, I got to talk to a lot of the different players on the team, such as Cortland Ford, Luke Duncan, Hudson Habermill. We got to interact with some of the parents of, the players and people that listen to the show. It was a great day overall, man. I got no complaints outside of just those few little issues I had with everything around the open walkthrough.
No question about it, Will. And I think the mindset right now is, and there's been a lot of conversation over the last week, 10 days on social media, on kind of traditional media as well. I think DeShaun is very focused on outcomes and he's very focused on, quality of what's the product on the field. And I think that's where he should be. And I think to his point, the marketing and the other sort of vibe and juice and entertainment, is sort of secondary to him. And I think right now it's all about what's on the field. And he believes very strongly that if you win, the product on the field will sort of sell itself. Now, there's some coaches who believe very strongly in that philosophy. There's other coaches that believe that you need to sort of bring those other elements along as you develop a program. I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong answer. I think it's just sort of stylistic preference with the type of coach that you have. And so I think all we can do is just, really support DeShaun's vision moving forward in terms of, what this season can be and what his tenure is going to be. So I think we're really excited, Thriller. My goodness, it's 6 days away now from the start of the season. I think what's on everybody's mind, you and I have had such great conversations over the last few weeks, the last few months. We've talked about different position groups. We've talked about different expectations. But I think this is the show now where it all comes together. And, we're going to go sort of position group by position group and who we believe is going to start for the 2025 season and who we believe, deserves to start sort of long-term as well in terms of what we're seeing from the offseason heading into the 2025 campaign. Thriller, we'll start with the easiest one. I don't think we need to spend much time here, but, we have to sort of be complete in terms of our this. Let's start with the QB room. I think this is one where this is kind of a quick in and out here. Obviously, it's Nico. He's not only the face of the QB room, he's sort of the face of the franchise. And in many ways, he's been the face of the college football offseason. And I think you and I have both interacted with him in the last few weeks. And I think you and I both kind of come away with he's got that it factor. There's a calm, there's a cool, there's a charisma, there's an aura to him. He's unquestionably QB1. Even yesterday at the open scrimmage, I think he took 90 to 95% of the snaps. And so obviously this team is going to go as far as Nico Iamaleava takes them. He's obviously talked about the mental aspect of the game, stepping up there. And I think with the tutelage of Tino Sunseri, we're just expecting huge things. It's like our friend Ben Bolt said, really expecting superstardom there. I think beyond that, though, Will, I get the sense, there hasn't been an announcement, but as you mentioned him earlier, I think Luke Duncan is going to be QB2. And I think just for all the reasons we've talked about in terms of his size, his mechanics, just how similar he looks to Curtis O'Rourke at Indiana last year in that Sunseri Kirk Cignetti system. So I've got obviously Nico, unquestioned QB1, Luke Duncan QB2. And then I think it's interesting after that. But I think, with Madden and others and so forth, but I think that's a very clear pecking order. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it would be, complete foolish babble to say that anybody other than Nico is going to be the guy taking the first team snaps. But, my first time getting to interact with him yesterday, really nice kid, very driven. He's confident, not cocky. He's got that gravity to him that you can feel. And DeShaun even alluded to that in the Big Ten interview with Ashley and Yogi, saying he reminds me of Julius Peppers. Like Julius Peppers was one of the best defensive ends, star players in the NFL for almost 2 decades. So he's got that air to him. You could see, all the kids scrambled over to Nico. He was signing autographs, doing those little things. And you couple that with he's just scratching the ceiling or, the surface on what he essentially can do. He made the college football playoff as a redshirt freshman and a first-time starter last year. What do you think he can do with year 2 with maybe a more, offensive coordinator that allows him to kind of open up his skill set to what we think he can be? I think the sky's the limit. And then, Luke Duncan's great, man. I talked to Duncan, too. I was talking to him and Cortland Ford on the sideline. The thing that I give Duncan over the likes of Madden is he had a sprint, and he was able to interact with Tino in those moments. And I think with Madden, he's a little bit more raw than, Nico coming out of a high school. So it's going to take Madden a little while. The ceiling's still very high. I don't want to, take that as, Madden is not going to be able to be playing for UCLA at some point, because I think that's very realistic. But if you're asking me today, right now, I'm going Duncan 2, Madden 3, and, obviously our guy Nico at number 1.
Yep. No question about it there, Will. And obviously, as far as we go this season, much is going to be hinged on Nico Iamaleava. So easy one there. A little softball to start, Thriller. Let's stay in the backfield. Let's talk running backs, RBs. I think there's a sense here, it was very deep to sort of start, spring and then kind of heading into fall. Will, I see it as a pretty clear pecking order. I think Javion Thomas and Jalen Berger as sort of the starting two. We've talked so much about Javion Thomas, a.k.a. Jet, last year at Cal, over 100 yards, over 100 carries, over 600 yards. He was 6.3 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns. I mean, there was an argument that he was greater than Ott at Cal last year in fewer touches, and I think it's a very credible argument. And then you sort of bring him in with Jalen Berger, year 2 now in this system. I think you've got a really nice thunder and lightning combination. I think that's sort of what we saw yesterday at the open scrimmage. And then I think the third guy that could potentially sort of threaten over the course of the season, God forbid there's sort of any injury or kind of stylistically, depending on the type of team, I think Anthony Wood's got a lot of run. I think it's pretty clear that he's sort of RB3 in that first in line. And obviously he didn't play last year, Will, but, you and I talked about it 2 years prior at Idaho in that 2023 campaign, Thriller, over 1,000 yards. He had 16 touchdowns, 5.5 yards per carry. So you can't really argue with the production on the field. Love his size. I think it's clear to me, though, that Javion Thomas and Berger are going to start in the backfield, but you got a really good guy in Woods to sort of come off the bench, get some touches, be a change of pace guy. And then I think there's some gap after that. But I think those are probably your top 3 running backs. And I think, Thriller, if Nico is the ultimate barometer of this team, for me, it's going to be hard to look back on this season and say UCLA had a great season and Javion Thomas did not. I think he's going to be such a huge linchpin to this team in terms of his burst, in terms of the number of touches, his endurance, even his ability to catch out of the backfield. So I've got Thomas, Berger starting, and Woods is a really nice number 3 piece. Thriller, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think to the casual football fan, I don't know how many people are plugged into the nature that if a quarterback has a strong running game, it makes everything easier for the offense to function efficiently. Like Garbers had 0 run game last year. We ranked in the bottom 3 in the country in Division I in run game and output on that. It made our offense, incredibly challenging to move the ball down the field. So when you have a guy like Javion Thomas, who outperformed a guy in Jaden Ott, who just went to Oklahoma last year at Cal, he's the guy we're looking at. He was out yesterday, when it came to the walkthrough. I think he just tweaked something. I think he's going to be 100% by the time we get to Utah on Saturday night. But Thomas has got a lot of juice. You mentioned Berger. Berger was the guy kind of getting most of the reps in the walkthrough, which makes you think he's 1B to kind of Javion Thomas is 1A. But think about this, Madman. How many running backs with a season like Anthony Woods had is a third RB?
Yeah.
1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns. Like that is an elite season in any form of football you throw out there. So for the fact that Anthony Woods is 3 there, that's, kind of eye-popping. I think he can be really good. He's a little more slender than I thought he was.
Yeah.
When we saw him in person, he might have a little bit more burst and shiftiness than I would have anticipated initially. And then you can't forget about Anthony Frias. I think his specialty is going to be that screen pass game and how he could do, make catches out of the backfield. I was at the Friday Night Lights. We went to a bunch of spring practices, at, UCLA's campus, and Frias was kind of popping out when it came to those catches out of the backfield. So between those 4, that's a room I'm not worried about, especially with DeShaun Foster heading this team.
No question about it, Thriller. I think, Thomas, Berger, to start. You got Woods coming in there as that change of pace, coming off of 1,100 yards 2 years ago in Idaho, and then Frias for certain packages potentially as your RB4. Got to be feeling great about that room, particularly given DeShaun's experience. So, Thriller, we're humming along. The other sort of unique position on the chessboard, if you will, that's really going to determine offensive explosiveness, the wide receivers. And you and I have sort of talked about this. I think what I saw yesterday confirmed some of the things that I said earlier in the week. I think to me, Thriller, the ones that looked pretty clear, it was Quasi, it was TMA, and it was Mikey Matthews were the 3 that were sort of in the ones group. We have such high hopes and expectations for Quasi Gilmer. He's talked about winning the Bolitnikov this year. He's talked about going for it. I mean, I think this is a year with Nico, and given that arm talent, 1,000-yard receiving year is a goal for Quasi Gilmer. And I think it's something that potentially he could attain, 1,000 yards, maybe double-digit touchdowns. I think those are the aspirations he's really chasing, and so much upside there. I think TMA, just that knack of being able to get open, that veteran experience as well. And I think the ability to sort of build on putting a whole season together that's injury-free. We love TMA so much. He's a favorite of the show. His family's a favorite of the show. We love him so much. We love his family so much. I think this is the year he sort of puts it all together. He's going to be injury-free and do some amazing things. And right now we got Mikey Matthews as sort of wide receiver 3, your pure slot guy. He was at Cal. He was at Utah prior to that. 8.5 kind of yards per catch career. Your prototypical slot guy. He's also back there returning punts as the primary punt returner. And Will, I think that's kind of the going in position. But just to me, it really feels like I think you're going to have to bring in Jaden Wilson as being your wide receiver 3, just given the verticality element. Gilmer is a guy who can kind of strain you on all 3 levels of the defense. TMA is going to be more kind of 20, 25 yards and in, but that true kind of go route and that top end speed, particularly at a 6'3" size. When you look at Gilmer at 6'1", 6'2", TMA at 6'1", a little bit of a bigger frame and more speed. I just see Wilson ultimately breaking into this starting lineup. But right now, it is Gilmer, it is TMA, it is Matthews. And then the 5th receiver, Will, that I think we saw getting a lot of run yesterday as well was Xavier Staples. And Staples is even bigger at 6'4". So I think he's still a little bit more of a project, but it is very interesting that I think if very clearly going in, receivers 4 and 5 were Jaden Wilson and Xavier Staples, and then you didn't really see a lot of guys getting a lot of runs. So I think that 1 through 5 right now at receiver is a pretty clear pecking order, and I'm expecting wide receiver 4 to flip with wide receiver 3 at some point this season. Your thoughts, Will?
Yeah, so the wide receiver room, I think coming into this year, we thought it was going to be a lot more complete than what the product looks like right now. I mean, DeShaun alluded to the fact that he had 90% certainty that Caden Robinson was going to get approved to play for UCLA. Rico Flores, very, very talented wide receiver. Who knows when he's coming back? The October is kind of the timeline they've slotted for that. But that's, over a month into the season at that point. Is he going to be able to grasp the new offense? Is he going to have chemistry with a new quarterback? There's a lot of options there. I think we're all pretty confident with what Quasi can bring. And, confidence is the name of the game for that guy. He's talking Bolitnikovs. He's talking national championships. We love it. But that second wide receiver is going to be big. And I am 100% with you that I think Jaden Wilson has got to be the guy that we target a little bit more, because Nico is the type of quarterback with that arm talent. You got to stretch the field for the guy. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday. Mikey Matthews, 32 catches, 272 yards, and a touchdown last year. That's about an 8 to 9 yard average per catch. Jaden Wilson, 15 catches, 199 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's 13.3 yards. So I want the more stretch play like that. Jaden Wilson was one of those guys you watch in spring practice at the Wasserman Center. I mean, he could fly out there in the open field. I like that pairing more than I like the Mikey Matthews. And yes, you need those type of guys with Mikey, the death by paper cuts kind of route, whether it's your Jacoby Myers, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, you need those guys. But with a quarterback with the arm talent of, Nico Iamaleava, it's like getting a Ferrari on the highway and then going 55 when the speed limit's 7. You got to let it out, man. Yeah, so give me some Jaden Wilson there. I really like that. TMA, that's going to be his big thing. We've always liked him. Can he be healthy this year? I'm pretty optimistic on what TMA can bring to a team if he's there. Ask Ethan Garbers last year. He loved TMA. That was his guy. So, yeah, if we can get some Jaden Wilson run, and, this guy's comes from Arkansas. He's a track athlete. He's played against Ole Miss. He's played against Florida. He's been battle-tested. Let this guy off the chain a little bit and let him run.
No question about it, Will. Love all the points that you made. And Nico's a guy who loves to air it out, too. We saw it at Tennessee last year, and he's going to take his shots. And so for that reason, you need a guy who's kind of more of a traditional go route runner. That's why I think we really like Wilson. And I think, again, Will, to your point, Caden Robinson, I think, would have brought a lot of versatility on all 3 levels, would have been a great compliment. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, to your point. And then I think Flores, the sky's the limit, right? I mean, we saw him last year after that Hawaii game. I mean, truthfully, Will, after fall camp last year when you and I were there, and then after that first game against Hawaii, you and I thought he legitimately could be wide receiver 1 last year. In terms of the way, and he was. Yeah. He was. And so I think, to me, though, it's a little bit of a stretch. If I were DeShaun and if I were Tino Sunseri, I would say, look, if Rico Flores, we can get him back into the fold at some point in October, and he can give us something great. But I think coming back middle of October, you're 6 games in at that point. I think it's going to be a very likely redshirt type of year for Rico. Just going to be really tough to kind of come in and make a big impact midway through without any preparation. And really, I think for Rico, setting up the 2026 is going to be fantastic. But I think this is sort of our group 1 through 5. And I think you and I agree. Keep an eye out for Jaden Wilson. He could make a big splash as recently as week 1 against Utah on a big go route. So looking good there at receiver, Will. And, of course, complementary to the receiver, that tight end room. I think this is another room, Thriller, that it's pretty clear cut right now. This is about as clear cut as it gets. Hudson Habermill looks every bit tight end number one. We're expecting a huge year from Hudson after the injury-plagued 2024 season. Let's not forget the big game that he had against SC back in 23 in the Coliseum, and just that huge game that he had against Washington, in the 23 season with ETR. And, we've just seen flashes of Habermill. The athleticism is there. And, yards after the catch, he can block. He's got a huge catch radius. If he can stay healthy, you're potentially looking at a guy maybe outside of Gilmer who's probably going to be second on the team in receptions. I really believe that in terms of how he can get open and all the different elements that you can play him with. You can get really clever there in the backfield with him. You can have him close to the offensive line. You can sort of stretch him out a little bit more out wide. There's seam routes, there's crossers, there's out routes. There's just so much you can do with Habermill. I'm really excited to see him put it all together this year. And then you got to love Jack Peterson at tight end too. I think it's very clear Jack Peterson's there. Also, ton of underrated athleticism there. I think he's a phenomenal blocker as well. He also looks just so comfortable and smooth with the ball every time he gets an opportunity. So to me, Habermill starts. Jack Peterson's going to be a great tight end number two. Then I think there's some distance there in terms of some younger guys, but pretty clear-cut tight end room for me. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, Hudson Habermill, it was kind of the tragedy of last year that he couldn't play, because if you remember how he finished the 2023 season, 2 catches, 29 yards, 2 touchdowns against SC, and then he had a touchdown against Boise State in the bowl game. The momentum was swinging the way of Hudson Habermill. And then he just had that, terrible injury last year in spring practice, which, knocked him out for the year. But, we're waiting in line yesterday, and he's coming off the field. I think he's a fan of the show. He came over and was like, "Hey, Will, what's going on?" Like, he knew who we were. So that was really cool to see. And Hudson is just one of those guys, man, where you look at the upside, and I think he's a yak guy. He's one of those guys, not quite Greg Dulcich from a few years ago, who is, by the way, having a resurgence with the New York Giants, if you've been paying attention in preseason.
Yes, absolutely.
Really Hudson Habermill has that yak quality where you can throw it to him in space, and he can make some defenders miss in the open field. So I like Hudson coming into this year. And I like, especially we were talking about the receiver room looks a little thin. Expect Habermill to come out and make some plays here early, because we're going to need it. We're going to need someone to step up with that void at receiver without a Caden Robinson, without a Rico Flores. Give it to the kid that did it in the Victory Bell game. Come on, give it to my guy Hudson Habermill. Jack Peterson, we met Peterson's mom yesterday outside.
What a lovely lady, and what a fantastic family.
And it's clear, with Peterson, just what DeShaun has done in terms of you could tell who he believes the leaders of the football team are. And he's come out, talking about Jack Peterson a lot. And I think there's some upside there with Peterson. They feel pretty confident at tight end, just hearing the comments that they have. You got a tight end transfer from Pittsburgh and Jake Brenda, who's a redshirt senior. He might be able to make some plays out there. But I think you're right in the pecking order, man. Hudson, I'm excited for the upside. This is the year we didn't get last year with Hudson. So I'm hoping it's a good one for our guy, Mr. Habermill. Let's see some big stuff from the big guy.
Let's see some big stuff from the big guy indeed, Thriller. And such a great point, right? I mean, the last 2 games, not even 2 games, the last sort of, 6 quarters, essentially, that we saw Hudson Habermill, he ended up with 3 touchdowns. I mean, you could see there was that breakout. With every sort of young player, particularly at that receiver position, it sort of clicks. You see it and how it translates over. So hopefully he just sort of carries over now from the end of that 2023 season into the start of this season. And now with being healthy, should be really phenomenal. We're expecting huge things from Habermill. Thriller, the last unit of the offense is perhaps the most important for a variety of reasons. One is, as we've talked about, this conference is built from the inside out. Number 2 is your quarterback play is only as great as the protection that he gets. And then obviously everything that you want to do from a running perspective is predicated on the type of scheme you have with the big uglies up front, this offensive line. Thriller, this is sort of the fascinating group to me. And I think, again, a group that's going to play such a huge role in the win projection for UCLA. We've talked about it. We talked about it with Ben Bolch as well. You and I have discussed internally. We've analyzed what I'm excited with this offensive line about, Will, last year was painful. It was a work in progress. It was a struggle. I don't think Ethan Garber's got a fair shake in terms of his ability to showcase his talents, nor some of the criticism that he was getting last year because he just didn't have any time to throw the ball. That was a very difficult year from both a pass protection as well as a run blocking perspective. One of the toughest years I've seen UCLA have, certainly in the last 15 years and potentially in the last 25 years with the offensive line play. We come in, Will, with 4 new starters and really sort of have peppered the transfer portal. And what I like here, Will, is all 5 guys north of 320 pounds that are the projected starters. And I think we got to start left tackle. We got big Mr. Cortland Ford. You had a chance to say what's up to him yesterday. 6'7", just a large specimen of a man. I think at that left tackle position, protecting Nico's blind spot, very clear that he's going to be plugged in there. Then at left guard, the starter is going to be Eugene Brooks. Again, that transfer from Oklahoma. I love the way he's sort of his hand technique, low center of gravity. He's wide, really perfect for that guard spot. Then I think at center, what was surprising a little bit, Will, is we sort of had a going in position with Sam Yoon, who had a really, really nice year last year.
Yeah.
Akinsholo has now come in as being that starter at center and presumably now is going to fortify that position. But I'm really excited about Sam Yoon as well. And I think Sam Yoon is going to have a significant role on this team for 2025, certainly, and definitely beyond 2025. Then you look at that right guard spot, Will, and then that's Julian Armella, the transfer from Florida State, IMG Academy, another big body. Really like what he can bring to the table. He's a little bit more athletic than Eugene Brooks. And so I think he's going to win a lot on athleticism in that guard spot. And then at right tackle, Mr. Old Reliable, Garrett DiGiorgio. If it's not delivery, it's DiGiorgio, And so Mr. DiGiorgio coming in at that right tackle spot. So that's where I see the starters, Will. Even yesterday, you saw who the ones were at that offensive line. You got Ford, you got Brooks, Akinsholo, Armella, and then you got DiGiorgio. But I think that this is also going to be a world here, Thriller, where Sam Yoon is going to play a lot as a rotational piece. Ben Bolch even alluded to, hey, do you have Akinsholo and Sam Yoon together in certain situations? Yeah. I think Unije is going to have a role on this team as a rotational piece as well. So, and then you got some younger guys coming in with the depth. But I think that's the 5. I love the fact that they're all north of 320, like we talked about. And I love that they have come from really significant programs or have had a ton of experience with UCLA. Thriller, your thoughts on the big uglies?
Yeah, so I feel confident in about 3 starters right now. And I think the rest can just kind of rotate until we find that unit that we feel comfortable with week in and week out. The 3 guys I feel comfortable with: Cortland Ford, 14 starts to his name. 6'6", 315, started at Kentucky, started at USC. It's kind of a full circle moment for him coming back to LA after starting as a Trojan. So Ford is a guy I feel very comfortable penciling in the starting lineup. You mentioned it. It's not delivery. It's DiGiorgio. 38 games in his career as a starter. Like, that's something you can't buy in the game.
No question.
You want him out there. He's a very reliable starter. I like Garrett DiGiorgio. And by the way, if he plays well this year and kind of raises that level, he's going to get drafted by an NFL team. Like,
agreed.
What people want in the NFL is people that have starting experience and did it at a high level for a long time. DiGiorgio has been a pretty good player for a long time. So if he raises that level this year, NFL ceiling is right there for DiGiorgio. And then I'm with you, man. Sam Yoon, I think we should start at center just to start, because Akinsholo, I get it. He's 325 pounds. He's a big body in the center. But there was a clear delineation in how this team played last year when Sam Yoon came in the starting lineup. Started 8 games last year, got a lot of experience. I would like to see Yoon starting day 1 against Utah. Hey, if Akinsholo is a future, all Big Ten selection or, NFL draft pick at center, I get it. I'll hear you out. But Sam Yoon, what he did, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I thought he was pretty good last year.
Agreed.
And then when it comes to the other bodies, Eugene Brooks didn't seal the field at Oklahoma, but he's a former top 100 recruit. I think we all agree that kid's ceiling's very, very high. Julian Armello, mostly a special teams guy at Florida State, 6'6", 320 pounds. We'll see what happens there. Akinchilo, you mentioned, 325 pound. I feel like he's more of just that road grading guard. But if he happens to be the center we talked about, we'll take him there. And then Katie Arnold, the Jacksonville State transfer at tackle. I think he's going to get some run out there. Unije, you mentioned he was a friend of the Bruin Bible podcast, came on last year when he transferred from Houston. But outside of that top three, I'd be interested to see what the mix and match looks like moving forward, because I got to be honest, Sam Yoon is a starter for me day one against Utah.
No, it's a great point, Thriller. It's really a great point. I think when we started hearing from the program that Akinchilo was sort of headed to be the starter at center, I think you and I were both sort of surprised. And I think it's going to be a battle. And I think it'll be interesting. I think going in, it feels like Akinchilo, just in terms of the way the team is talking, is going to be the center one. But I think it's going to be a battle all year. And I think I totally agree with you. I mean, when we made that shift to Yoon, I believe it was the Penn State game, Will. And I think that's where, it flew a little bit under the radar, because in that particular game, all anyone could talk about was Femi and Femi moving from linebacker to edge and what a huge impact it made. But Sam Yoon moving into that starting center spot against Penn State really had a significant impact on Justin Martin's ability to be able to complete passes and move that team down the field. And so I completely agree with you that as the incumbent, I think Yoon did a phenomenal job last year. The development was great. So I think that's going to be an interesting one. I love your take there. I think it's going to be some rotational, movement. And I think it'll be fascinating to see how DeShaun plays it against Utah, and then how he plays it after that. Because I think, Utah, big game. It's the great unknown on both sides. But then presumably, UNLV is a sneaky good team, but still non-power four.
They won. And they got an extra week on us.
They got an extra week on us. So they're going to be a sneaky team there. Then you got New Mexico. Then you got Northwestern. Particularly with Northwestern and New Mexico, you're going to have a little bit more wiggle room, I think, to explore. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he does against Utah, and then how he goes through this exploration, because I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's some variety there to explore, but this feels like the five going in to start, and we'll see how it all shakes out. So, Thriller, we got one side of the ball. We're loving it there. Now let's head over to the other side of the ball, the defensive side, and I think we'll just sort of work our way inside out. Let's start with the defensive line. The big question here, after all that this team has to replace, particularly in that front seven, where we are headed from a defensive line perspective. Thriller, where I see the starters from, my own assessment, as well as who I saw got the majority of the first team reps yesterday, I think we feel really good about the interior with sort of our two veteran staples, Keanu Williams, Gary Smith III. Both, is this the year they can sort of put it all together after some injury-plagued years? They both look big. They both look nasty. They both look like they're going to really sort of clog up that interior. And I think Topaki, Thriller, I think is going to be sort of that third interior lineman that's going to sort of give them a blow. I think Topaki is going to be that third guy in that interior, and it's going to be sort of a rotating wheel there. And then I think there's sort of a break. Others will play, but it feels like a 1-2-3 pecking order, with Topaki being that primary backup on both sides of the interior. Then I think when we go to edge here, Will, look, I think it looks like it's going to be Busic on one side and Anthony Jones on the other side. And I think Busic, there was sort of a little bit of a mystery with his offseason, with sort of eligibility and whatnot. We're thrilled to have him back. But he's going to now be a starter, at defensive end. Can he make that jump? Can he make that jump to be really a very strong defensive end at this level in the Big Ten? It was one thing to do it in the service academies. Can you sort of translate it and be more than just a rotational piece and be a starter and be an effective starter? That's going to be a big question for this team, and Busic on one side. And then you got Anthony Jones on the other side, the transfer from Michigan State. Hey, if you're good enough to get recruited by Michigan State at the edge, you got to be doing something right, but he's unproven. A ton of athleticism. You could see it on the field there, but can he sort of put it all together? I think those are your two number ones at the edges. So I think the defensive line here, Will, looks like Jones. You got Keanu. You got Gary Smith III. You got Busic as your starters. I think Topaki is sort of your primary first backup on the interior. And then I think you're looking at a Devin Apu, and I think you're also looking at Nico DeVilliers, the transfer from Arkansas, to sort of come in there on the edge. And I think it's going to be sort of a bit of a rotating wheel with those four. How are you seeing the defensive line play out, Thriller?
Yeah, it's going to come down to rushing the passer this year with UCLA just as a whole. Like, that is the biggest question mark, coming into this season. And Okaika Malloy, who we both believe is a very talented defensive coordinator, this is his biggest test as a coach so far in his career. And they've got some talented pieces there. I think we're all in agreement, the entire fan base, Keanu and Gary, are going to hold down that interior. And I think they're, very solid when it comes to kind of opening those gaps up for the linebackers to come in and make plays. Similar to what Toia did last year for the likes of a Schlesinger or Kane Madrano out there to come in and make plays. When it comes to the edge rushers, I kind of did a little bit more research before this. DeVilliers has 6 starts to his name in 34 games of action. 2 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss. So if you equate that to he had those numbers in starts as an Arkansas player, he's actually pretty productive. 2 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss in 6 games. That gives me a little bit more optimism when I'm leaning into a guy like Nico DeVilliers. We were high on Anthony Jones because he came from Michigan State. But what people forget is he actually went to Oregon initially in 2022. So he's got an Oregon pedigree. Name a kid in high school football right now that doesn't have Oregon on their top 5. I'll call you a liar if you don't. It's 4 tackles for a loss and 2 sacks. He got some time in Michigan State. He got some time in the trenches in Big Ten Conference. So I think I'm pretty high on Jones. And the guy I've got my eye on and really kind of taking that final step and becoming maybe a leader on this defensive room, Apu, man. This kid started at Notre Dame, 5.5 tackles for a loss, 1.5 sacks in his career. The talent's there. He's got enough experience out there to make plays. Apu, we're ready for that jump. We need it this year if UCLA is going to have a chance to reach those heights that we kind of projected for them. Busic, I think, can be very solid in setting the edge on the outside. His pass rush is very limited, in my opinion, coming from where he's come from. So I just believe if DeVilliers, Jones, Apu, 2 of those 3 guys can be just average or a little bit above average, we're going to have a shot in every one of these games we play. But this is the most critical piece of UCLA's football team this year is how do we generate pass rush for this team?
No question about it, Will. Really well said. And I think the bottom line comes down to you got 4 primary pass rushers. I think Busic is a guy with maybe the lowest ceiling but the highest floor. He's just sort of consistent. And I think the other guys each have a higher ceiling but potentially a lower floor because you don't know what you're going to get. And I agree with you. For those 3 higher ceiling guys, if 2 of those 3 can hit, and we've talked about it, and you can get a Jones with the DeVilliers when they're clicking, or you can get, an Apu with the DeVilliers, if they're clicking, I think that is going to be a huge change in terms of how we think about these games, these 50-50 games, as well as these games against Ohio State, Penn State, at Indiana, and so forth. So that's the big question. Can Jones sort of put it together? This is the Jones, DeVilliers, Apu. They're all sort of journeymen. They've been highly decorated recruits. They've had some run. They've shown some flashes. They've moved around to some different schools. The talent is clearly there. But can the talent, the preparation, the maturity, the development, and the program all align? And if 2 of those guys can hit, and you've got 2 credible, high-end starters on each edge, my goodness, with that offense that is presumably going to put up a ton of points, and you have the ability to rush the passer consistently, the ability to disrupt plays in the backfield, and set up the opportunity to be turnover savvy and opportunistic on the back end, it changes the whole landscape of how you think about this season. So lots to watch, and particularly in that Utah game, fans, look at the edges. How are we setting that edge? How easy or difficult is it going to be for Utah to be able to make those stretch plays? How easy or difficult is it going to be for Utah to go zone? How easy is it going to be for Utah to be able to run power? That is going to be a very key scenario in terms of understanding what we have really on that defensive line. So lots of excitement there, Thriller. We'll take it one phase back. Linebacker room. I think here also sort of interesting, but feels like a very clear pecking order to me, Thriller. You got Isaiah Chisholm, the transfer from Oregon State. He had 75 tackles last year at Oregon State. Expecting big things from him. Love his frame. He's a side-to-side linebacker. And then obviously the great wild card. And we've talked about it so much. John Vaughn's back, full-time football. Can he be that hybrid Derwin James safety linebacker, really that queen piece on the chessboard on the defensive side of the ball? Those two took the vast majority of first-team reps in the open scrimmage. They're going to be the starters. I also know, Thriller, you're very high on Ben Perry, right? The transfer from Louisville. Yeah. He's 100 career tackles over 2 seasons at Louisville. He's a guy that you could argue had probably the most production in his career out of all 3 of those guys. And is there a world where Ben Perry usurps, a Chisholm and a Vaughns potentially to make it to that starting group? But Chisholm and Vaughns feels like they're going to be the starters to start the season. And with Ben Perry kind of nipping on their heels, potentially objects much closer than they appear in the rearview mirror. And then I think there's sort of a gap there, Thriller, in terms of who's next. But those seem to me to be linebackers 1, 2, and 3. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Perry, you mentioned it, man. I'm very high on him. He's a 3-year starter at Louisville in the star position. This guy can play. 132 career tackles, 11 tackles for a loss. And to kind of compare to John Vaughn's great year, which was in 2022, I mean, that's 3 years ago now. 54 tackles, 2 interceptions. Are we going to get that 2022 version of John Vaughn's? I like him because he came back to spring ball this year after not playing baseball. But 2022, that's like a lifetime ago in the world of college football. I like Vaughn's. I think the team is very high on Vaughn's. But Ben Perry today, after being a 3-year starter compared to what we've seen from Vaughn's, I'm actually banking on Perry to be a little bit more consistent with his 3 years of starting that he's been able to project out there. Chisholm has the chance to be a star in this defense. But the one thing with these 3 guys that worries me a little bit is they're all a little on the smaller side when it comes to linebackers. I think they top out about 215, and that's John Vaughn's. Ben Perry's 210 pounds. Chisholm's 212. We talked about it. These Big Ten running backs are different, man. Ron Daines, Le'Veon Bells, Mike Hart's, these bulky 220, 230 running backs. When you got 20 pounds, on the running back going in against the linebacker, those hits tend to add up. I want to see a little bit more beef coming in there. Carson Schlesinger was a legit 230 running around there making plays. Medrano was a 230 legit going out making plays. So I think this is actually the deepest room we have. I think when it comes, I feel very confident. DeShaun actually alluded to this point at Media Day with Wayne Cook and our buddy Nick Coop out there. He was talking, he's like, I think this is the deepest room we have. So when you got that linebacking room there, I feel confident in all these guys. And I think they're all going to make plays. But can they stay healthy, I think, is my biggest concern.
It's such a great point, Thriller. It's such a great point about the size, and I think side to side, they're going to be great. And I think sort of helping out on bubble screens and lateral plays and being able to go sideline to sideline. The question is, can the body hold up with game 9, game 11, game 13 with that north-south pounding? And I think it's going to be, sort of a phenomenal point there. And Thriller, it's no coincidence, right? Like the last great John Vaughn's year, 2022, let's not forget what UCLA did in 2022, right? I mean, that was the year that UCLA beat Utah, beat Washington, was really in a position in November to threaten for a college football playoff spot. And as much as it was about DTR and Charbonnet and all of the shiny toys offensively, 2 guys on defense really stood out. In addition to Latu, it was Blaylock captaining that team on the back end, and it was John Vaughn's causing havoc on all 3 levels of the defense. So if you can get that version of John Vaughn's, to your point, hey, 2022 in college football is sort of a lifetime ago. But if he can resurrect that, my goodness, what this would be. And Ben Perry kind of bringing that experience and that productivity to UCLA from Louisville would be massive as well. So lots to be excited about there, Will, in terms of linebacker. Now we go to the secondary. It's interesting that DeShaun said that the linebacker room was the deepest room, because I would say it feels like we have 27 defensive backs. We
do. So we have a lot of defensive backs.
In terms of the secondary there. But, Will, when we're sort of looking at this, in a traditional kind of 4-2-5 scenario, and we're looking at this from a nickel perspective, 5 defensive backs, to me, what I saw in terms of the number ones in the secondary, I think at safety, it was pretty clear that Key Lawrence is going to be at one side, and you got Cole Martin on the other side. And Key Lawrence, with all of that terrific experience, played at Ole Miss last year, some big games, Georgia, Alabama, some really, really huge games in the crux of the SEC. He's really going to be the captain of that defense, both on the field as well as off the field. You can just see it there, play over play. And then Cole Martin, coach's son, that perspective of being able to see the field from the lens of the secondary coach, I think is going to be invaluable. Cole Martin, of course, was at Oregon, then Arizona State, sort of comes back home with his dad. We're very, very excited about that. And then, Will, I think in terms of corner, it's sort of interesting. I think it's very obvious to me that you got Roderick Pleasant is going to start at one corner, the transfer from Oregon, all that track speed, and just, that athleticism I think is going to be phenomenal. He's got a nose for the ball. Expecting some big things from Roderick Pleasant on one corner. I think the other corner looked very obvious to me, Thriller, that it was Robert Stafford, the transfer from Miami. He looks like the other starting corner very clearly. And I think bringing that sort of bump and run coverage, that physicality that he displayed in flashes at Miami last year, I think was very, very significant. And then I think at nickel, you're looking at Kanye Clark. And I think Kanye Clark sort of making that jump. But it looked very obvious to me, Thriller, that starting 5 in terms of the secondary was Lawrence, it was Cole Martin, and then it was Roderick Pleasant at corner, and then you got Kanye Clark, and then you got Robert Stafford. That was the 5. I think there's going to be a rotating wheel with a lot of other guys. This is a super deep room, but I think that's the 5 that you're going to see on that first snap against Utah. Thriller, your thoughts on the secondary?
Yeah, incredibly deep room. I think just the difference I have with the linebacking room is you've actually tangibly seen a lot of these guys out there making plays. When it comes to the talent room in the cornerback, the defensive back room, there's so many guys that were like 4-star recruits, Stafford being one of those guys. He kind of rode the bench in Miami for 2 years as he ready to step up and make plays. Roderick Pleasant, Oregon guy, top 100 recruit. He was kind of one of those guys that didn't get a lot of field time at Oregon. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does. The guy that I think can make a couple jumps here is Andre Jordan, a transfer that came from Oregon State with Chisholm. 9 starts last year for Oregon State. You can look really good in practice, but there's nothing like the game time experience when you got to go out and make plays. So Andre Jordan's a guy like 6'1", 175 pounds. You mentioned it. Kanye Clark is one of those guys the coaching staff has mentioned time and time again as a playmaker. They clearly like this kid a lot. So Kanye Clark is going to get a chance out there. And then just the one guy that I think can really take a huge leap is our guy, Aaron Williams, former Bosco player, 6'2", legitimate 4-star recruit. He's got that Richard Sherman kind of Jalen Ramsey body type. Whoever's going to go out for corner or defensive back, I think we're going to find a way to make this room work, which makes me feel very confident about it. And you talked about Key Lawrence, man. This dude was a multi-year starter at Oklahoma, 14 starts, 158 tackles in his career, 11 tackles for a loss, 3 interceptions. He kind of checks the box in every which way you're looking for. He's a vocal leader out there. I think he's going to be one of the crucial leaders of this defense this year. So I'm really interested to see how he kind of interacts with the teammates, how he progresses this defense from where we start to how we finish at the end of the year. So, yeah, man, it's a wide open competition right now. You mentioned Cole Martin. I think he's going to be playing a lot. Coach Meat's son. I think that's a really cool storyline heading into the season. But talent is in that room, man. We will figure out our 4 or 5 guys we're going to be trotting out there amongst the 10, 11 talented players we have in that room.
No question about it, Will. And I think the mixing and matching there, particularly this first 3 or 4 games, is going to be fascinating. What are the combinations of units that are really going to work for different styles of offenses? And I think you nailed it, Will, when you said, hey, anyone can sort of look good in sweats and basketball shorts. How do you look when it's real football? There's real hitting. There's a real scheme going on. So I think that's going to sort of rotate. This is sort of the 5 we think are going to start. But to your point, Will, a lot of versatility there. Man, oh man, Thriller. We sort of went through every single position room. I'll pepper in a couple of things. I can't forget about special teams, obviously. I think we really liked that what we saw from Jaden Marshall as potentially a primary kickoff returner. We mentioned Mikey Matthews, I think, is going to be the inaugural punt returner, but who knows? Is this an area where a Roderick Pleasant can get some touches, given that incredible athleticism and speed? Please, we're waiting for it. And then, of course, our man, Mateen Bagani, our kicker. Look, I got to be honest, it was a little rough out there
yesterday from our guy.
He missed 2 kicks, but listen, he's just working out the cobwebs. We feel great about our guy Bagani making some kicks. I think he's just got to kind of, stretch it out a little bit, get a little focus.
I think it was a practice.
It's just practice.
In game-like environments, I'm a little bit more nervous, but the last guy I'm worried about on this team is woke up in a new Bugatti. Pagani, let's go, baby. He's got the year on lock. He's going to deliver us some big wins with some game-winning kicks.
No question about it, Will, from your mouth to God's ears in terms of those game-winning kicks. But man, oh man, what a great end-to-end projected depth chart thriller. So much fun. And I think I'll close with this. I think one of the big themes here, Will, is there's a lot of variety with this roster. A lot of influx of talent. A lot of guys left, a lot of guys came in. And so a lot of these rooms, who is starting game 1 may not be the starter by game 4, game 6, and certainly by game 12. And I think there's sort of a going in position, but each of these rooms are so deep that there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching going on. And I think that's what's going to be so fun. You and I are probably going to do another sort of depth chart, probably a quarter of the way into the season, and we'll sort of compare how things have changed from our going into the season projection to where things netted out in terms of how guys actually looked on the field. But really exciting indeed, Thriller. Cannot wait to jump into it. We've got a really fun episode on Wednesday previewing Utah with a Utah expert. So that's going to be an amazing conversation. Man. And then you and me, baby, we're going to be game 1, 8 p.m. Saturday night at the Rose Bowl.
Baby.
We better see everyone out there. We had a ton of fun. We saw some really great supporters of the show yesterday. Really so grateful, so meaningful to us. And, everyone is so kind in the Bruin Nation and the Bruin family. And we're just so proud to rep the Bruins. And like Will said, hit that like and subscribe button. It's a big year for LAFB and a big year to grow the UCLA content community. And hopefully we see you out in LA over the course of the week. Start repping the gear, folks. We're 6 days away from kickoff. Rep the gear, bring out the posters, bring out the flags on the car. Let everybody know you're a UCLA Bruin, and let everyone know to watch out for these Bruins in 2025. And as always, be loud, be proud, Bruins. 4's up forever, baby.